You are listening to Eastman's Flycast, an adventure fly fishing specific podcast covering travel, tactics, and next level insight. Now your host, Brian Barney.
Hey, what's happening, guys? Got a brand new Eastman's Flycast for you. So today on the podcast, I have on my buddy Stephen Palmer. So I met Stephen at the Western Hunting Summit, and we talk about that a bit, but we got chatting, and the guy's just a die-hard fly fisherman. We're going to put a trip together in the near future, but I wanted to get him on the podcast. He just did this recent trip down to South America. He went down there, and he's fishing in Bolivia, fishing with Angler Frontiers, and just had this amazing experience down there. It's such an adventure. So it's fresh in his mind as he just got back 2 weeks ago. So his memory's really fresh of everything. He describes the trip so well. I feel like I was there with him, and I have to do this trip once in my life, to get down to like that Amazon jungle and fish some of those rivers for those dorado. He sent me a video after we got done of these dorado just blowing up on these bait fish. Just super cool. It was a really fun interview. I enjoyed it, and I know you guys will enjoy it too. The first, as soon as I hit record on the podcast, he had some guys doing some yard work outside his place with a leaf blower, so you'll kind of hear that in the backdrop. It only lasts for a couple minutes, and then all the audio cleans up. But just a great recording, and thanks to Stephen for being on the podcast. And man, let's get right into this thing. So Eastman's Flycast. I'm your host, Brian Barney. Here we go. Okay, I'm live. I've got my buddy on, Stephen Palmer. So I met Stephen at the Western Hunting Summit, and while we talked some hunting, we definitely talked a bunch of fishing, man. You love to get after it, don't you?
Yeah, man. Anytime I can. Fishing, hunting, anything outdoors.
Yeah, it's super cool. So where are you based out of?
Dallas, Texas. So live in a suburb of Dallas and work in a suburb of Dallas.
Oh, gotcha. And you work at the Orvis shop, right?
Yeah, the Orvis in Plano, Texas. So just one of the Orvis retail shops there. I'm the fishing manager, and so do a lot of classes and teaching, and along with just the retail side of it, and hosted trips and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, so based out of Texas down there, man, you just love to fish. You were telling me about the carp fishing and the browns, and then, like, dude, you go on a bunch of trips, and this last trip, it's like, it's been killing me not to ask you about it, because we talked for 5 minutes before I hit record or whatever, but, dude, you just went down to South America. What an epic trip.
Yeah, it was amazing. Epic is definitely a good word for it. Such a
dude.
Cool place.
It's just the coolest, like looking at your photos, like fishing for a bunch of different species down there. So like, how'd the trip come about? You know those guys from Angler Frontiers, right?
Yeah, I know Federico and Patrick. Actually, this is the first time I met Patrick going down there, because he stays in Bolivia, and then Federico lives up here, and they manage the outfit and help get everything going. So for the last, I don't know, five years, I guess, we've been working on trying to get out there and experience this. And, you know, you see all the epic footage they post and other people post, so it's been on the list to get out there for a little while.
Yeah, dude, you take a bunch of cool trips, but that thing was just like next level. So you've been wanting to do this trip for a long time, and talking to those guys and planning it, saving your pennies, and like go down to South America and go experience the Amazon, right?
Yep, for sure. It's definitely not the easiest place to get to. It's not terrible, but it's something you got to plan ahead for. So yeah, we've been planning that and working on it, and you know, just waiting for the time. So we had perfect timing now.
Oh man, so my buddy Wesley White went down with those guys and took a bunch of the photos and video down there. It's so unreal. It has to be like the absolute top of like my dream places I want to go. So tell me about it. So you took off, probably flew from Texas, some airport close to you. Like, where was your first flight, second flight? How much Spanish do you know? Like, how tough was it with the COVID restrictions? Like, how'd the travel go?
Yeah, so logistics wasn't too terrible from Dallas. we did have to take a PCR test 72 hours ahead of schedule or ahead of flight, and that's for getting down there. So we did that. That's a whole story in itself, of us just being paranoid, and not knowing what's going to happen. Another buddy that was supposed to go on my trip actually tested positive for COVID and was not able to go. So it made it very interesting leading up to leaving. But once I got the test back and I was negative, I was super happy. And that next morning we actually flew out, and from Dallas we fly to Houston, and then Houston to Panama City, Panama, and then down to Santa Cruz, Bolivia. And that's the first leg. So we left about 7 a.m., got there 9 p.m. at Santa Cruz.
Oh, man. Your buddy tested positive, huh?
Oh, yes. And, it has to be 72 hours before. So he took one test and it came back abnormal. And he sent it to me, and I'm like, well, what does that mean? and so he said he called the doctor the next day, and they said basically it's a positive. It's just not showing a lot of, I guess, the virus in your system at that time. Not completely sure. So, at that point, we're just like, okay, go retest. And at that time, I was waiting on my test. And luckily, I went and took another one that was a rapid PCR test, because my first test would have never got back in time anyway. So because he tested negative, I took another test, which it all worked out in the end. But he tested positive. He actually took like 4 tests in a row just to make sure. And they all came back negative, which, definitely a bummer. But he got the opportunity to go up to Wyoming and Montana and kind of spend his time alone in a tent fishing around those areas. So he took full advantage.
Oh, man, it made the best of it. It's so tough, like, trying to travel nowadays. We had to do the same thing to go to Hawaii this summer. So I was heading out there with a buddy to do some hunting out there. And, I'd scheduled my test, and it's got to be the 72 hours before. And so, I show up at the place I have scheduled 3 days before, and I go up there and I try to get in, and they tell me, well, yeah, and this is part of the clinic, of part of the hospital. And they said, well, our tests count for like 48 of the 50 states, but they don't qualify for Hawaii. So now I'm just in this scramble to try to get my test. And so what does qualify for Hawaii is Walgreens. And so all the Montana ones are booked up. And then they have the 2 different tests on there, right? Like you're saying, the PCR and the rapid test. And the PCR won't come back in time, like you're saying. And so, like, trying to figure it out, I ended up driving to Idaho the day before we left, making like an 8-hour, 9-hour drive to make sure I could get my test so I could get out there. It's just crazy.
Yeah, for sure. And fortunately, here in Dallas, we have a clinic that I come to find out that you can take a rapid PCR test, and I got my results in like 40 minutes. So I did that, and it definitely cut down on the stress of getting there. And, I've heard that, in Montana, it's been kind of complicated. I've got a friend that lives up there, and she said that when she's traveling, she's got to plan long ahead for those things.
Oh, crazy. Okay, so got your test and then flew down there. How long's the flight down there?
So we left 7 a.m., got there at 9 p.m. That's split between 3 flights. From here to Houston's an hour, and then it's another 5 hours to Panama City, Panama, and then maybe another 5.5 to Santa Cruz. So we had some layovers in there.
Crazy. Yeah, that's a long day of travel. It just wears you out. Like, you're not doing anything, but you're just like exhausted from all the travel and sitting, or I'm not sure what it is, but jet lag is real.
Yeah, it definitely, fortunately down there the time zone's pretty similar, so that doesn't mess with you, but the travel of just sitting around that much, you're trying to walk around and do the things that keep you motivated. But yeah, it is what it is. We all do it to get down and do things that are cool. So
Oh yeah, and I've noticed you just got to go with the flow, right? If you're in an airport or you're traveling that way, you just can't be in a hurry because you're constantly waiting in a line. Can't get too excited. Like, you just got to go with it. You just got to say, "This is what I'm doing today," and go all in on the travel. I remember New Zealand flight I had was like, I think it was 24 hours, but I think it was like the actual flight itself was like 18 or 20 hours or something in an airplane. And that's sitting in those coach seats that lean back all of an inch or whatever, man, that's a long time in an airplane.
Yeah, I've definitely done that too. I've been to Vietnam, the same kind of deal. And I'm not a small human being, so I'm always looking for the exit rows and like the places that fit my tall legs.
Dude, yeah, I'm a small guy. I can fit anywhere, and it's still uncomfortable. I can't imagine having those long legs like you do, and like trying to sit in those small seats, man.
Yeah, it's always fun, and that last leg of the flight from Panama to Santa Cruz, we couldn't figure out how to select seats, and so my friends about your size that went with me, and we get the seating chart and we're split up, and I'm like, oh, this is never good. And we get it, and we're both in the middle seats, and he's like 3 rows in front of me, and he's even uncomfortable too, being in the middle. And he said he kept looking back at me. I'm just like a sausage in the casing, sitting in between these two guys, just trying to get through it. And it is what it is. Like, again, but it's always hard doing that. You're so happy to get off that plane after being squished in the center for so long.
Yeah, crazy. So, so from where you land, like, how far is the drive? Who picks you up?
Yeah, so they actually have a driver that picks you up in a vehicle, and they take you to the hotel. So the first night we have a hotel. It's actually a really nice hotel. It's like a 5-star hotel there in Bolivia, and a pool, and everything you need, right? We weren't there very long for that first night. We got there after getting our visas and everything in customs. We probably got there 11:30 to the hotel. And then we had a 6 a.m. flight out of there on a Cessna into the jungle airstrip. So you fly another 3 hours in the morning, well, 2 to 3 hours depending on weather and everything, into the jungle there, and land in the middle of a jungle that it's an airstrip that they have created specifically for their lodging, and then from there you jump on a dugout canoe and go another 2 hours upriver. So another part of the trip is actually really cool. I really enjoyed that part of it, but you got to travel a little bit more.
Man, that is wild. Those small planes are different than the big planes, aren't they? They're a little bit sketchier. And when you talk about the runway, like, the runway is probably like just dirt, right? That's kind of made flat.
Yep. So they just cut down the jungle in this one strip that's probably, I don't know, whatever the length that they need to take off and land. And they go out there and they grade it as smooth as they possibly can. It's still got lumps and stuff going on. But when you're landing, the river's right there. So basically where he sets his wheels down is probably 100 feet just in front of the river. So you fly over the river as you're landing. And I think I had a video I posted of the plane landing in slow-mo. It's pretty cool. But yeah, those planes are definitely different. And fortunately on the way there, the flight was super smooth, and we had really good weather. And actually the pilot looked over at me and he was like, hey, you want to fly for an hour or whatever, or fly? And I was like, I'd never flown. I was like, yeah, sure. So he let me take the wheel and kind of show me some stuff.
Crazy.
Yeah.
It's always nice to have good weather when you're in the small planes or whatever, but it has to be like out of this world to like take all those flights. Like, I just know anytime I travel, like, you just you walk off the last plane and you're in this totally different ecosystem that feels different, probably humid and warm there, but I just can't imagine like landing that small plane in the middle of the jungle there, and I mean, like, you're in the middle of nowhere. And flying over those trees and then seeing the different river, was it a big river that you put on and rode up?
Not too big, probably 100 feet across, not a huge river. And that's in the lower sections. It gets skinnier as you move up. So, it's a pretty narrow river considering.
Yeah, and wild, right? That ecosystem, like the sounds of it and like the sights and how tall the trees are. It's got to be wild.
Yeah, for sure. It's I mean, I loved it. It was so cool. There's so many things going on, and you hear birds and parrots and frogs and everything else that's going on. But it's also just like outside of that, you hear nothing man-made. It's just besides a plane, just silence. There's no blowers and mowers and stuff running in the background.
Yeah.
The other thing that was really cool is just you think it'd be super humid because where it's at, you're in the middle of the jungle, but temps were pretty good. And it is humid, but it doesn't feel like if it was here in Texas humid. It's at night it'd be 65 to 70, and during the day 90 up to I think 100 was the top. But it's really weird because it's cool and it's humid, and you'd be walking around and you'd blowing smoke at 70 degrees just because of the humidity.
Oh wow. God, it's got to be wild, like being under that canopy too. You got to be in the shade most of the time, right?
Oh, all the time. Like if you're in the jungle, on the river you get full sun, right? Because there's no canopy there. But in the jungle, it's thick, dense canopy. Like you're not seeing too much of the sky. It's pretty impressive how thick it is, And a lot of the stuff that we walked in the jungle, it's all being cut as we're walking because that stuff grows back so fast.
Man. Yeah, and so, wow, any air movement through there at all, or is it pretty still in the jungle?
It's pretty still. I'd say you definitely get breezes, and it's cool because you're in the shade, and you got that kind of cool humidity. So yeah, not much wind though, and I know it can be that way. Their season of which they try to bring customers and people into there is they try to bring them in during the prime times when you're not getting dense rain and stuff like that. So I imagine, because it's near the Andes, I imagine they get some pretty crazy weather sometimes.
Oh yeah. So okay, so they have you come in their dry season. Do you know what that season is?
Yeah, I think it's June through October. October is still really good. I think just towards the end of October it starts to change a little bit, and then of course past that is when they start to get more of their wet season. But when we were there, we're basically winter getting into spring, and so that's why the temps they can be pretty consistent around that 60-degree mark at night. Earlier than we were there, I think they had some nights where they were getting down in the 40s.
Oh man, that's cool. That's like up here in Montana.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. You don't think of that kind of location having that type of weather.
Yeah, and it's wild. Like the southern hemisphere is opposite. Like you said, winter coming into spring. When you're up there. So yeah, they try to time it right, get you in there right, and so. Like I'm dying to hear about those dorado, but where did you start fishing? Took the canoe up the first day, and then where did they have you staying at?
So the first day we get up to the lodge. They have a lodge there built in the jungle, which is a whole nother story in itself. But Patrick and them had that idea, and they basically worked with the Chimani tribes that are there on the river. They built this lodge 9 years ago. They were always making it better, but they took timber and wood from the jungle and built this lodge. So it's all made from their area, and they milled it all with chainsaw mills, and worked with the local tribe to do that. And it's cool because Patrick's a natural. He understands the fish and how to keep things in the right balance, right? So at the lodge, you don't feel like you're just in a clear-cut area. It's still got a lot of trees, and there's like birds and bugs and tarantulas and all kinds of stuff still around, so you get that full experience still. And then from there, once we arrived that night, we actually arrived about 4:00. We had enough time to grab some lunch, and then that night we fished for Paku, which I don't know if you're familiar with Paku or not.
I think of them as like a piranha or something, but that's not right, is it?
No, they're they look somewhat like that. The way I explain is most people know what bluegill are. They're just like a 25-pound bluegill, but they have teeth that are a real human-like. If you look at our front teeth, and you put them into that fish. It's real similar, and so they eat nuts and seeds and fruit and stuff like that fall from the trees, along with they're omnivores, so they eat grasshoppers and other things as well. But basically, like a big bluegill. So you know how hard a bluegill fights. We're always wanting as fishermen a bluegill if it was 20 pounds. That's what we're always thinking of. We're like, man, that thing would fight hard. So that's basically what it is.
Wow, so they pull hard.
Yeah. And I think the major thing with them is their shape, right? Think of like same thing like a permit. They use current in their favor, and they know how to use that to their advantage. And I think fight-wise, they're probably harder fighting. You're also using lighter tackle for them a little bit, not rod-wise, but line-wise. And they're using the current, and they're running pretty aggressively. So you don't want to break them off. You're trying to balance that out.
Yeah. So what size rod, what tippet are you down to fish for those?
Yep. So for everything down there, we're fishing for the most part 9s and 10 weights. 9 weight for the Paku, and we're throwing 25-pound, basically 30-pound straight fluoro to a 25-pound bite wire because of the teeth. And we're using flies that mimic the nuts in that specific area. I mean, even in at the lodge, when you're walking around, you can see these nuts on the ground kind of all over the place, and that's what those fish are feeding on. So it's really interesting is I tied a bunch of flies before I left, and I tied some flies out of like deer hair and stuff that are weighted so they'd sink, but you need that real specific plop, and the way that nut plops in the water. So the guides had made some flies, so we use those, or sometimes they will literally just take one of those nuts and they'll cut a slot in it and put it on a hook and glue it, so you want that exact plop, and that's what kind of brings them into that area searching for that stuff.
Oh, crazy. Okay. So you tied like a perfect imitation, but it didn't make the right noise when it hit the water, didn't have the right sink rate or something, and so they wouldn't eat it.
Yep, correct. So once you cast that fly out, you want it to make that plop, but then you want it to sink to the bottom, and that's usually when they pick it up as it's transitioning or sinking through that water column, and then you bring it back in once you see your line and everything's kind of stopped moving, and then you recast, and you're trying to cover. If you see them, of course you could sidecast to them, but a lot of them they're holding in pretty deep water, so unless they're at the surface, you're not going to see them. And so you're casting in the same areas multiple times, mimicking those nuts falling in the water.
Oh, crazy. So you got to almost hang your cast out there because you want it to plop. You want it to make that noise.
Yep. Equivalent, we're making decently long casts with this because we don't want to get too close to where those fish would hold. So the longer the cast, probably the better. But you're almost making like a tuck cast, where you stop your rod tip high, it tucks that fly in, and it's the first thing that hits the water before your line does, and to create that noise.
Oh, cool. Man, and they fought hard, huh? How big did they get?
So we only caught the one, and I actually caught it on the first evening. But I think they can get pretty large. A lot of people here in the States, I've heard it's one of the big ones that's a lot of people keep in their aquariums, of course. And I've heard they can get pretty large. I haven't researched it, but I swear we saw one that was probably 40, 50 pounds probably. It was huge. So this one was probably half the size.
Still a big fish. That's wild. So you can just see those things feeding out there on those, see them come up every once in a while.
Yeah, you would see them come up, make a splashy, they'd splash their tails as they're going back down. And, the ones that we only saw a couple that were up real shallow, just underneath the trees, kind of looking for nuts. And a lot of times it was when we were searching for other stuff. But yeah, you definitely can see them, and they're black, so they stand out. They contrast really well with the water, and so they're pretty easy to see when you do see one.
Gotcha. But pretty wary. That's pretty tough to get them to eat, only catching one of those things and seeing a bunch of them.
Yeah, they call them the jungle permit. The permit's notorious for being so hard because they just what we would say not honest fish. They don't eat. If you make the perfect cast, they might not eat, right? But I was just super fortunate. I still can't believe I caught one on the first evening, and got it in. Even like I kind of put the wood to it a little bit and got it in pretty quick. And our guide was like, so at that time I didn't tell you this, but we're fishing out of the dugout canoes at that point. Because it's such deep water, we're actually casting from the dugout canoe, and he's over there just being silent because he's scared at any moment it's just gonna pop off. But we got it in.
Oh man. So yeah, fishing out of those dugout canoes, that has to be tough too, because you're sitting down, you don't have a lot of leverage, sitting pretty close to the water.
We're actually standing up in those. So the big thing there is everybody else, because you're throwing these really heavy, dense flies. When you're starting to cast them, everybody's ducking. Like everybody's as tight as they can possibly be to the bottom of that boat, and then you're making your cast standing up. So they're pretty stable boats. You can, at least one person can stand up at a time.
Oh man, yeah, that's yeah, they must be good boats. That's crazy that they stand up or they're not tippier in there. But yeah, that's cool. You get to stand. It's way funner fishing standing up than it is like sitting down in there.
Yeah, for sure. You can see a lot more. You can kind of figure out what things are going on. Yeah, they're cool boats. So they're a dugout canoe, and then they actually add some height to them with another board just above that to give them, because they weight them down pretty good when they're traveling. So if you got some decent balance, you can make it work.
How many times do you think those guides have been hit by flies?
Man, I don't know. I can tell you, my buddy hit me once, and then later in the week, I hit myself once. So
it does happen. You get really good at controlling your cast and where it goes, but you mix a little wind in that, or long cast, or who knows. Like I hate to run that thing through the boat, but I can't say that I've never hit myself.
Oh, it happens. And that thing is, gravity is your worst enemy on those nut flies, because those things are not liking being in the air, so they're falling pretty quick. And it was on the last day, but I knocked myself in the back of the head with one. Fortunately, it just knocked me in the side of the head and didn't do anything. But
yeah. So like staying over there, so you're going out fishing on this dugout canoe. The bugs have to be crazy. Like you mentioned it before that you saw tarantulas and things, but just the ants crawling around and the bug life has to be wild in that jungle. I've said wild a bunch of times, but that's what I think of when I think of being in the jungle. Just like this wild ecosystem, with stuff going everywhere.
Yeah, it's definitely wild. It's a good word for that. Just everything's moving everywhere. You've got leafcutter ants traveling across the ground on multiple locations, just carrying leaves everywhere. You see spiders everywhere. So if you're scared of spiders, you'll get over it real quick. Fortunately, none of that stuff bothers me. We saw tarantulas, and there was butterflies everywhere. There's also caterpillars everywhere that want to sting you. So you got to kind of pay attention and be cognizant of what's going on, which is cool. That's part of the experience, is seeing everything that's going on in the jungle. Everything's moving all the time.
Did you get hit with anything, or anybody there at the camp get bit by anything?
Fortunately, we did not. So the only thing that really bugged us was there's these little, I don't know if they're flies or gnats, but these little yellow things that like to get on you. And that's about the only thing that got me. And usually I go places and I'm like the blood donor to every bug in the area. They just love me. And fortunately, they didn't like me as much there. But these little guys, that was the worst one. And most of the guys there that weren't from there, that's the one thing they complained about, was those little yellow gnats or flies. And I actually, it's kind of crazy. I've been back for a little while now, and I still have a couple of them that still itch.
Oh, still. Yeah, bugs can be a major part of any trip. I know, even a lot of these trips that I've taken, it's sometimes you get in these ecosystems and like being in mosquitoes. Oh, it's like torture. It's like on the scale of pain of 1 to 10, it's probably like a 1 when they bite you. But when you talking, they're constantly on you and constantly swarming you, and those small flies or those small gnats can be even worse. Just the way they're always trying to fly in your eyes and in your nose and in your mouth. But sometimes those bugs can be really thick. So it sounds like you guys hit it right. But those yellow flies they'd bug you every once in a while or get on you, huh?
Yeah, that was the only thing really experienced. I mean, we'd see some mosquitoes every once in a while, and of course, you're watching out for everything because they have bullet ants, they have caterpillars that if you touch them, they're gonna sting you. Of course, other things like spiders and hornets and bees, and I mean, stuff's everywhere.
Yeah, some of that stuff could be pretty painful. Like those bullet ants, I heard the bite on those things is intense. Like it sends you into like this, into this psychedelic state almost from the pain of those things.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's one tribe. It's not there in Bolivia. It's somewhere else. But they do that bullet ant mitt where you got to stick your hands, and it's like something when you're growing up. You have to stick it in there to make sure you're a man. I would definitely, I'd definitely experience it, but I'd have to be somewhere where if I start twitching crazy or something, they could take care of me.
That's intense, huh? Yeah, wild. Well, yeah, it sounds like you guys had a good trip and timed it right with the bugs as well. But then what's your fishing experience there then? Do you go chase dorado? Do they take those dugout canoes up different systems or down the same system, or how do you go about it?
Yeah, so the first couple of days we were there, we stayed at the main lodge. We went up there to explore and kind of push a little bit further. It was actually just me and my buddy, so we were fortunate that we had a small group, so we got to explore a little bit more. But the first 2 days we went up the Casare, which the Casare is one of the rivers that they fish, and it goes up. If you're looking at the lodge, it goes up to the left, and so the first day we fished halfway up, basically, where they typically fish, to one of their other out camps. And that first day was epic. I mean, I lost a huge fish on that day before I really knew how to fight them. And they were just being super aggressive and just crushing bait and just going nuts. It was amazing. So right off the bat, we had some amazing eats and some amazing fish caught. And that one I lost, it was demolishing some food, or sabalo, which is the bait fish that they eat. And they'll eat a fish that's 1 to like 3 or 4 pounds. So they're eating some big fish. And that fish went into a feeding frenzy. We were just walking up. I was able to get my fly right in front of it, first cast, and hooked it. And it took me 250 feet downriver before I really knew how much pressure to put on them. And that one, it came off, unfortunately, but it was a good sized fish.
Oh, those dorado are just a dream fish. So those are actually like an ocean run fish that follow those bait fish up these systems, or are they coming up there to spawn, or both?
So they're actually a freshwater fish, and they live in those rivers. You would think they're saltwater, right? They're just so primal. They're just big heads, big teeth, and they're just trying to destroy and kill everything in there. But they actually live there in those freshwater rivers, and they travel and follow the sabalo. So they definitely migrate. And what I understand, I don't know their spawning habits. I try to ask a little bit about that, but nobody seemed to know as much. It's something I need to kind of look into more. But yeah, they stay there.
Oh, wild. Okay, so I thought they ran up like chasing the sabalo, but they just live because you see such big fish in small systems, but they must be that must be that migration that you're talking about, where they're following the sabalo up those systems.
Right. Yep. I think from what I understand, the lower stretches of those rivers they're a lot wider, and that's where they might have smaller fish, and those smaller fish, as they're getting bigger, they're starting to migrate with the sabalo. I'm not 100% sure, but that's what it seemed like. So they might be spawning or doing whatever they need to do in those lower stretches. But I know like Argentina and stuff where they fish for them down there, I think they stay in some of the bigger bodies of waters and they move upriver, kind of the same thing. But where we're fishing, it's all small water river fishing.
Oh, I know. It just looks like the coolest systems in the jungle, and almost like a tea-colored tint to a lot of the water, and it just looks amazing. It had to be such a cool setting. Like a lot of this fishing and adventure fishing, it's not only the species you're chasing, but it's like the places where they live, like the coolest places on earth. Like I know, chasing Olympic Peninsula steelhead, in the rainforest. Like it's not only the steelhead that are the coolest fish, but it's also like these systems and the runs that you get to fish and the surroundings that are like the coolest setting to go catch those. And it's just when you're talking about it, that has to be what that dorado and in that jungle are, where those dorado just belong, and chasing those bait fish. Dude, how crazy walking up on that giant one that was going ballistic on the water. I'm sure chasing bait fish like crazy and just blowing up in this hole that you walked up to. That had to be like this surreal experience.
Oh, definitely. I don't even know if there's a word that can explain it. I mean, it's crazy too, because when you're walking up there, that stuff just happens out of nowhere, and it's just because they don't realize you're there, and they're chasing what they're about to eat, and they get within. I mean, that cast I made was probably 30 feet, so not a super long cast, and you do have to be accurate, but everything's going at one time, and yeah, just like you said, stuff's exploding, and there's things going all over the place, and you're just trying to make it happen. Yeah, it's definitely epic and unreal.
And at that point, you're hiking up these systems?
Yep. So the guys, the Chomani, which is the local tribe there, they have guys that run the boats because they're really good at that. It's super skinny water, and so we would get dropped off at a certain location, and we'd hike upriver. And the guys in the boat would follow us up as the day progressed. As we fished runs, they would stay back a couple runs and work their way up as well until they just couldn't. At one point, at some point, it just gets too bouldery and too technical for them to keep pushing that boat up. So, we pushed up pretty good that first day, lost some really nice fish, and then we walked back to the boats and go back to the lodge for the night. And then the second day we did the same thing, but the second day we pushed further up that river. We actually stopped at their out camp the first day, and the second day we went all the way to the out camp and then walked from there up. We pushed it probably further than some others. We might be walking, 5-7 miles every time we're fishing upriver. So, that's stopping and fishing holes as you're going.
Yeah, man. So going for it. I mean, that's an all-out send in the jungle, especially fishing along the way in the riverbanks. You guys were putting on some miles.
Yeah, when it takes it out of you. It's definitely a fishery that, you want to kind of prepare for or know that you can do it, because it's not like super difficult, but you're slipping and sliding all day long. You got to wear felt boots because everything's pretty slick. And then you're doing a lot of step ups, so it's a lot of boulder hopping and boulder jumping in the upper stretches where we were trying to push to. And the reason we were trying to go there, it's the water quality is so crazy. It's super clear. I mean, you can see everything, and you get that different experience up there.
What type of flies are you throwing for these things? And do you still use that leader, the steel leader you were talking about?
Yep. So for dorado, we do transition to a lot different fly, of course, and we transition to same thing, 9 and 10 weights, but we fish 40-pound straight to 40-pound tieable wire, about 12 inches of 40-pound tieable wire. And a lot of it's just because you can really fight the fish the way you need to fight them in those waters. It's super narrow, and there's boulders everywhere, and those fish do not care. It's insane. They'll jump. They come completely out of the water when you hook them, and they will land on rocks and all kinds of stuff, trying to evade you, right, and wrap you around stuff. So having that heavier leaders for that. And then fly-wise, we're using basically 6/0 hooks, the SL12 6/0, with Indino deceiver patterns or similar stuff. So basically like a big deceiver that's black, purple, black, red, black, orange, anything kind of dark, because those sabalo are a dark bait fish, with some weight on the head and some deer hair on the head to kind of help with how they land in the water, because those fish can be, if they're not aggressively feeding and like crushing stuff, they can be a little bit spooky if you plop one down too hard.
Oh, gotcha. And so, like, when you're fishing to these things, are you mostly have to see the fish before you'll cast to it, either blowing up trying to get bait fish or sitting in the run, or will you blind cast as well?
Yeah, definitely both. Ideally, we all want to sight cast and see that eat. That's what really gets us going, right? But you definitely have to blind cast when those fish are not in the feeding mode. And throughout the day, you could tell, the fish would act different. They'd be a little bit more spooky. They'd be a little bit more aware of their surroundings. But then they would turn on. And when they turned on, or if there was a ball of sabalo next to them and they knew, I guess, that they could get something out of that, all of a sudden, it's like everything's going crazy. And that didn't happen every day, but it happened pretty often.
Man, it's amazing how even fish in the middle of the jungle can feel that pressure, know they're being targeted or spooked once, and they just act different. And so the time to get them is like that element of surprise, that first time up that system, like that brand new run that nobody's thrown anything in. So you fished up that one system first couple days, and then did you guys move to a different system?
Yeah, so the second day we pushed further up that same system, and the fish were really kind of off that day, and that water is super, like you said, you have to be pretty cognizant of how you're walking, how you're moving, so you're not spooking fish and keeping your distance away from the banks and looking, because it's clear water. And then the third day, what did we do? 7 days of fishing, all kinds of blurs together at one point. But the third day we fished. Did we fish up I think we stayed on the Caseray again. We just pushed up higher again, to some really crazy, giant boulders, like 3 buses size.
Oh wow!
And that was really cool to see all that. Yeah, you're definitely having to traverse stuff a little bit different up there because it's not quite the same. But you can definitely get in the river and move around too. And then the fourth day, we had a plan to go into another river system, which it's right there too, but it's the Pichine is the name of it. And so they have an out camp on that river as well. And that fourth day, we pushed upriver and fished to the out camp. Which they call it the Motoro camp, because there's another little branch or creek that is called the Motoro right there. And this is actually a jungle out camp that has tents, just like your normal tent you stay in camping. And literally in the middle of, you're already in the middle of nowhere, and then you're going even further, right? And then we pushed up from there again.
Oh, so cool that you get to experience different systems and different water to go chase them in. It sounds like different water every day. So go up this new system, and probably like every different system has a different feel to it, a different run. Like the water a little bit different, but where the fish are sitting are still kind of the similar water.
Yeah, correct. So I'd say the difference between like the Caseray, especially getting up high, it was like really big, giant boulders. And then you go to the other river system, it was more gravelly, especially at the beginning. So a little bit different, probably a little bit easier to get around. But same thing with that river. As you push higher up, it just turns into more of a bouldery kind of freestone river where you just got big pockets of water mixed with runs and fast water and slow water. And you would fish all that stuff because those fish that we're hunting sometimes would be in the riffles just like trout, but they're just 20-pound angry fish, right? And then you would go and blind cast some of the pools if you weren't seeing aggressive fish. So you're working different water types just like you would trout fishing, but with a 10 weight and a big streamer.
It's dorado or crazy fish. How many hookups a day, or how many probably like a lot of action, a lot of seeing them, casting to them. Like how many do you guys think you would hook up on a day, like an average day?
Between the both of us, I'd say anywhere from 5 to 8 and it varied in size. The small ones, if we targeted those more, we probably could have caught a lot more, right? But we were kind of trophy hunting, I guess you could say, at that point, looking for those big fish and focusing on that magical eat that you get with those big fish. I mean, if you're sight casting to them, it's crazy.
Oh, dude, it has to be so crazy. So, like, what's the size of a small fish? What's the size of a big fish?
A small fish, I mean, you're probably saying. I've got a lot of pictures on my Instagram if anybody's interested, but
What is your Instagram?
20 inches. It's 3 underscores BDK and then 2 underscores.
Such a great follow,
and I'll
dude.
post some more stuff too. I've got so many photos. But there's crazy. It's 20 inches, probably small, maybe a little bit smaller than that, up to. I mean, the biggest one I caught was 36 inches, and we're assuming it was above 30 pounds, 30 to 35 pounds, maybe. I don't know.
That is a fish. That is nuts. Oh man, they look so big and so powerful. They look so explosive too. Like when you hook one, it has to be just all out chaos. It's not like I don't. It's not like anything I've seen. It just looks like they're so explosive. Like when you hook them, they're so mad. It has to be. You got to have all your stuff together, I imagine. And you fish like all over planet Earth, like fishing for big fish. But you have to really be on your game with a fish like that, I would imagine.
Yeah, for sure. And every step of the way, really, from where you're placing yourself and the angle to how you're landing the cast and not spooking the fish, especially on the big fish. And then once you place the cast, hooking it, I mean, you hammer them. Like, you don't want to just, especially, you don't want a trout set for sure. You want to do a good strip set and just really drive that hook home. And then from there, I mean, you're really fighting them hard. I mean, you're pulling, like, we definitely keep our fingers taped and things on our hands from just burning yourself, because you're fighting them so hard, because if they get the edge, they take you 200 feet downriver and you lose them, right? And then they can also hurt themselves. So you're trying to manage a couple different things so you can release those back into the system. But yeah, it's a giant tug of war that you're trying to put as much force on them as possible and get them in pretty quick.
Tape your fingers, wear gloves from burn. And so that's the mistake you made on that first one. You said you didn't fight him right. So to fight him right, it's a ton of pressure, especially, I think you said 40 pound on there. So you're giving them all that 10 weight has to offer to try to control them and to try to not let them make those big runs and get them back. It has to be a crazy fight on those things. That hook set too, that strip set, is super important. Like you said, you got to give them everything you got on that strip set. It has to be like any fishing, like the more you do it, the more you start to get in tune with it and what it takes to catch them. But boy, you sure make some mistakes along the way. I'm sure you picked it up pretty quick, but you just learn what it takes on those things, don't you? The more you do it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, after that first fish, I lost it. None of us could not unsee that. So, I learned pretty quick, but that's something I teach people, like when I'm doing casting lessons and stuff, is like, you hold the line, feel how much pressure I'm pulling. Like, I feel like I'm really pulling on this thing, but you can hold it with your fingers, right? And it's just not doing anything. You got stretch and all that. So you really got to just put it to them, and their eat is so aggressive. I can imagine if you didn't do it right, you would just miss fish. And I've been fortunate enough to target a bunch of different species, so it definitely worked in my favor. But everybody you just got to keep that rod tip down and hammer them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you gave some instruction at the Western Hunting Summit too. You were so good to those guys there. You helped guys catch fish. You took them to the pond, taught them about flies. You taught them about nymphing, helped set up their rods, gave some casting lessons. You love to fly fish and love to teach it, don't you?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's definitely my passion, is well, fishing and being outdoors, but also the teaching aspect of it and seeing that light bulb moment. And I imagine you get the same with the things you've been doing too. The just that click when people understand. It's cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. What an amazing trip to be able to like prepare for this and go on this trip and then go target those huge dorado like that. I can't believe how big they get and how crazy it must get on that
Mm-hmm.
10 weight. And that's wild, like taping up your fingers and stuff. Like I've never heard of that, but I can see it. You definitely get line burn, like, and especially with those big fish, how powerful they are. They dang near rip your finger off.
Yeah, you know, we taped our hands and we gloved up almost every day, and actually the last day or the last couple days we did this epic hike. I mean, we went over a mountain. The end total I think was like over 16 miles or just around there, and we were on search for places that not many. I don't think anybody had been up there because even Patrick said he hadn't gone that far on foot. So we were looking for those big fish in those clear pockets, and that's where I caught that big fish was up there. And I taped my fingers. So after that hike, I don't know what I did, but I was pretty much nauseous all day long, which it is what it is. But I taped my fingers not as good as I usually do. And when I set on that fish, it it went through the tape and still gave me line burn. So you definitely gotta think about those things.
Oh, wild. What a crazy adventure. Like to go get to explore a system that Patrick's never been to, like to hike over a mountain, and that's going for us. You probably had heat exhaustion or something, or that's all in scenario in the jungle, humid and sweating out a bunch to make it to that different system and then fish it. What a crazy experience, like you say, you're already in the middle of nowhere and then you're venturing out even further.
Yeah, that was definitely the icing on the cake. I mean, the that trip's not just about the fish, right? It's like the whole adventure. You're in the middle of very untouched wilderness. You're seeing things you've never seen. Animals too. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we saw that I still can't believe we saw. We actually one day going upriver, we saw what we think was a juvenile jaguar. It literally jumped the river right there where it split was probably, I don't know, 15 feet wide, and it jumped and cleared the river and ran off in the bush. But yeah, it's the whole experience.
Oh, what an adventure. Yeah, that is so cool. And that's that day you caught that big one, was on that exploring. Was it a different system or just a different way you took over the mountain to it?
Right. Yeah, it was just a different route. So to get to where we could fish it, we had to traverse the mountain because if we went the river route, it was just taking too long. So we cut some time and made our way over the mountain. It's not like a not like a switchback trail, we just went straight up, and then straight back down, and then we crossed the river and then went further, right? And we basically pushed as far as I could. And actually, my buddy went with me. He's in super good shape. He's like you. He runs and bikes and everything. And they actually pushed a little bit further than me because I was feeling it a little bit. But it was cool for him too to see that, and experience that stuff. I kind of taught him, and he's learned with me since. And to see his experience unfold for him was pretty cool too.
Oh, what an amazing adventure. Yeah, he caught some good fish, hooked some good fish.
Definitely. Yep. He caught some really nice ones too. And, he had a great time. We've talked about it a few times since then. It's only been 2 weeks and we're already trying to plan next year's trip back there. We're figuring things out again.
Good for you. Like you go on those once in a lifetime adventures, and you just fall in love with the places and the whole experience to where then they start turning into a when I can do that again. It's a year, 2 years, or save your money. It's the same way in all the big places I've gone. Like they get in your blood. Like you get hooked on them. You had so much fun. Why wouldn't you try to go back?
For sure. And there's just so much experience. It's like one trip, yeah, we got an amazing trip. We saw some crazy things, and but then you just want to experience more and see what else there is, right? And you never know what's around the corner. That's what keeps us going, right?
Oh, that's exactly right. Well, how cool, dude. I know you do a bunch of other fishing there, and I'd love to pick your brain on trout. I just got to get you on again. I just had to talk about that jungle adventure the whole time and get the details of it, dude. What an amazing experience. Yeah, that man, it's I felt like I was there with you, like you talking about it and explaining it. So yeah, thanks again for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it. And there's so many details I left out because it'd just be like a 5 hour long podcast, right? So definitely we'll talk some more, and hopefully I can post some more pictures. And man, if anybody ever wants to learn fly fishing, they can give me a call at the Orvis Plano shop, and I can help them out as much as possible.
Yeah, and you're going to be doing classes again. I'd imagine once all this this COVID stuff gets over with, huh?
Yeah, the Rona's got to leave. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I still do some private lessons, and I still do some stuff here and there, but the big group stuff's hard to do when all this is going on.
Yeah, no, I hear you for sure. Well, dude, you're such a solid fly fisherman, and I can't wait. Like, we got to share an adventure together, and we've been in touch since the Western Summit, trying to plan something out. So we'll get together and be fishing somewhere before we know it. But, dude, thanks again, and keep in touch.
For sure, same. We'll definitely connect on one of these trips. And thank you a lot for getting me on here, and I enjoyed it.
Yep.